drumming, an adult drummer. A teenager from this side of the congregation walked up, tapped the drummer on her shoulder. The drummer handed a six to the teenager. The drummer had a seat, and the teenager resumed drumming. Bass player, keyboardist, vocalists, all one at a time, their roles were taken over by teenagers. Until by the end of the worship music experience, the entire team was young people. And the congregation was just going crazy. And then the senior pastor got up to preach. And he was about in his third paragraph when a voice from backstage yelled, "If you really mean it, you got to go all the way." And a teenager came from backstage, tapped the senior pastor on his shoulder. The senior pastor had a seat, and the teenager resumed the sermon. Yeah, I'll clap for that. Now, we're not saying that teenagers should take the place of adults. In fact, if I could wave my sticky faith magic wand based on our research and what we're seeing in churches all over the country, what I would want to see is adults and teenagers preaching together, adults and teenagers leading worship music together, adults and teenagers being third grade Sunday school teachers together. It's doing it together just like Jesus experienced. But it's not just about intergenerational worship. There's more to it than that. It's also about the relationships that we build. And part of what we're inviting leaders like you to think about because of our sticky faith research is that when it comes to extending Jesus' love to young people, we need a new 5-to-1 ratio. Now, what do I mean by that? This is a term that actually my good friend and colleague Chap Clark at Fuller Seminary coined. If you've done youth ministry or children's ministry or college ministry, you know that we talk about ratios a lot. We've got a trip coming up or small groups coming up. We want one adult for every, say, 5 students. One adult for every 5 students. What we're saying because of our research is what if we reverse that and have 5 adults for every 1 student? 5 adults who know that kid's name, who are supporting that kid, who, as I tell my 3 kids, who are on your team. Now, if you were a group of youth leaders, and I start saying we need 5 adults for every student, some of you would end up nodding at me like, "Go, Kara, yes." And others of you, the majority of you, would start sinking in your seats. Because you would think, man, I'm having a hard enough time recruiting 1 adult for 5 students, and now you're wanting me to recruit 5 adults for every 1 student? We're not talking about 5 Bible study leaders. We're talking about adults who will simply care about kids, who will know a kid's name, who will pray for a kid, who will go to a kid on a Sunday morning at church and say, "You know, I've seen you around. My name's Carol. What's yours?" And imagine that he actually responds to me with his name. You didn't know what I was going to do, did you? He was like, "Am I supposed to play along?" He did not know what to do. "Rick, great, nice to meet you. You know, I've seen you around. How can I be praying for you?" And imagine if Rick shares a prayer request with me. And imagine if I, as an adult with teenage Rick, when I see him the next time, I, A, remember his name, and I, B, say, "Hey, Rick, I'm praying for you with college applications. How's it going?" You know what we saw in Luke 2? As adults are around young people, they are changed too. So while our research was originally about sticky faith for young people, what we're seeing as hundreds of churches are applying it is it has a way of changing the entire church. Now, I could talk a lot about all different groups that have amazing potential to invest in young people, but there's one group that has untapped potential to invest in young people, and it's this group. Senior adults. There's just a special tenderness between senior adults and young people. And I think part of it in our church settings is because the average senior adult and the average young person both sadly tend to feel marginalized in our congregations. And there's something powerful about connecting them. I showed this slide when I was speaking in Iowa about a year ago. Go Iowa, all right. I was in Pella, Iowa, speaking, and a woman came up to me afterwards. She had to be in her late 80s, and she said, "Well, Kara, I love what you're saying, and here's what I do. Every fall, I get the names and addresses of all the high school seniors who've graduated and are going to college, the military workforce, And I write each one in the fall. And I write them letters. And I say they don't have to write me back, and they normally don't, but I just let them know I'm praying for them. I thought to myself as I drove away, how awesome that this woman in her 80s is writing one letter at the start of every fall to every youth group graduate. Well, the next day I was speaking again in Iowa. There we go, again in Iowa. And I showed this slide, and I thought, we communicators, we're always looking for fresh illustrations. So I said, hey, last night I met a woman here in Iowa who she is in her late 80s, and every fall she gets the names and addresses of every youth group graduate, and she writes each one letter. Isn't that amazing? And a man in the middle of the audience raised his hand and basically interrupted me, so I called on him. And he said, I happened to be here last night. I saw who you were talking to. She's from my church. She doesn't just write those students one letter at the start of every fall. She writes them every week. That is sticky faith. It's not only good for those kids who are receiving those letters, but it's good for her too. I could talk for hours about our research. I could talk for hours about churches. But I want to close by talking as a mom. Because my ultimate passion for sticky faith comes from Nathan and Krista and Jessica. And that is why I am here with you. Because I look at our church and our country, and I desperately want them to experience vibrant relationships with vibrant adults. I also believe that the best way to change our country is to have a vitalized church. How many of you agree with that? The best way to change our country is to have a vibrant, vitalized church. Okay, I would guess. Okay, I'm going to say the best way to have a vibrant, passionate church is to have it filled with passionate young people. So if you think about it, sticky faith, we change our young people, that changes our churches, that changes our country. And I want, Dave and I, my husband and I, we desperately want our 3 kids to have sticky faith and to experience not 2 separate tables, but church as one big table. I met another mom, I heard about another mom 2 weeks ago who has that same passion, and I'll close with this story. I was speaking on sticky faith, and a mom came up to me, we'll call her Melinda. Melinda's about my age, kids my age, and she said, Kara, my best friend, who's also our age, in our very young 40s, my best friend heard you speak about sticky faith 2 years ago. And she heard about this 5-to-1 ratio. And she's got 2 kids. Also, kind of my kid's age. She's got 2 kids. And so that was 2 years ago she heard about that. And she spent the next year building 10 adults around these 2 kids who can support her kids, who can be that web of camaraderie and prayer and support when her kids need it. She spent a year doing that, so that was a year ago. And a year ago, this friend, we'll call her Ann, this friend who was building that web with 10 adults, this friend was diagnosed with terminal stage 4 colon cancer. And it is those 10 adults who are walking through this season with those 2 kids. And it is those 10 adults who are going to be with those 2 kids, whatever happens with Ann. See, sticky faith, it's good for those 2 kids. It's good for those 10 adults. It's good for our country, and it's good for our churches. Thank you.